They're quite low now, and they have fairly big grooves. That will help warm it up and release it. I don't know which way to start. For the camera, I'll try and start at this end, although it's not necessarily the easiest way. Gradually nibbling underneath, and with any luck, it comes out very nicely. And you can also smell the junk. Finger juices. So I like this little tool. You can usually feel that it's claggy, chlory, slightly gummy, little lips that are still sitting proud. It looks as if I set this up for a 7¼ inch radius the last time I used it. It's a length that is slightly too big, and I feel that that gives more consistency than using a hammer. Today I'm going to refret this Fender Stratocaster maple neck. This comes from a 1980s Japanese-made Fender Stratocaster, and the frets have been well played. They're quite low now, and they have fairly big grooves, and the crowns of the frets have been lost over much of the neck. So the owner would like to change the style of fret as well. So currently they have vintage style frets, which are quite narrow, 78 thousandths of an inch, and we're going to replace those with slightly wider ones, around about 90 thousandths of an inch, and ones that are quite tall as well. So a type of fret that Fender have used, but not the same as coming out of these. So these maple neck guitars are quite difficult to refret because you have to be very careful to try to avoid damaging the lacquer. Now this one hopefully doesn't seem too bad, because being a relatively old neck from the 80s, there doesn't appear to be too much lacquer going over the tops of the frets and building up either side of the fret. However, even so, it is important to be careful, and what you have to do is you have to score either side of the fret with a razor blade to try to break the connection between the lacquer that's touching the fret and the lacquer on the top of the fingerboard. Normally, when I'm refretting, I take a belt and braces approach, and that would be to use a soldering iron to heat up the fret. That does a number of things. It helps release any glue that might have been used in the refretting process. They may not have used glue, but if they did, then that will help warm it up and release it. It also helps warm the lacquer around the fret, and that will make scoring the lacquer a little bit easier. You do have to be very careful, however, with these lacquered maple necks, because if you apply too much heat on the fret, then that can lead to discoloration or burning of the area around the fret. So you have to be careful not to overdo it. But we'll start with the belt and braces approach. So we'll heat the fret, we'll score either side, and then see how easily the frets come out. If they come out very easily, then it may be that we don't have to heat every fret. We'll just see as we go along. So to start out with, I'll just use this guard, really just to help me make sure that I don't slip when I'm heating the fret. I do have some solder on the soldering iron. There's no particular reason for doing that other than it improves the contact between the soldering iron and the fret. And that way the fret will heat up more quickly. So using a fresh blade, we'll just very carefully run the blade down the fret. It's taking out some of the grime that has built up over the years. Okay, and then I don't know which way to start. For the camera, I'll try and start at this end, although it's not necessarily the easiest way. So using a good pair of fret removal pliers, then we can just work our way down the fret, gradually nibbling underneath. And these fret removal pliers are designed to get underneath the fret, and as you pinch them together, it gradually lifts the fret out of its slot. And with any luck, it comes out very nicely. So we can see whether or not we've got any problems. And that seems to have worked quite well. So we're lucky in this case because there doesn't appear to be too much lacquer that is built up around the sides of the fret. Okay, so I think we can carry on in the same way and do the next one. So sometimes when you're heating up the fret, you can see and smell whatever is sort of being heated up and evaporating and coming out. And the smell often tells you what was used. You can smell super glue, cyanoacrylate glue. You can smell fish glue. And you can also smell the junk that's evaporating, that's been under the fret for many, many years. So again, we'll just score either side, and you can see you're just getting a little layer of possibly lacquer mixed with finger juices. Okay. With this fret warmed up, you can actually feel the blade just getting underneath the fret. Okay, I'll try cutting from the other side. Maybe you can't see so well. The key with these fret removers is you just need to get some purchase initially underneath the fret, and then you just close the jaws, and the jaws are beveled so they lift up. In the process of closing, they lift up the fret, and they do a very good job. So I'm not really sure whether or not heating the fret is absolutely necessary in this case, but because we don't really want to cause any damage, or cause as little damage as we possibly can, then it's probably better to do it rather than take the risk. So it's the first little nibble that is the hardest. Once you've managed to lift the fret a little bit, you just gradually work it along the fret, squeeze the pliers, and it will just gradually lift the fret out of its slot. Look at that, nice and easy. Some vintage gunk. So I will put a little bit more solder on here. Now if you ever wanted to reuse the frets, then obviously you wouldn't want solder on here, because it will coat the top of the fret and then you'll have to remove it afterwards. But there are times when you just want to remove a fret, keep it and put it back at a later stage. But in this case, the frets are going to be discarded, so it doesn't really matter if they have solder over them. But the solder just makes a better thermal contact with the fret and heats it up more efficiently. Okay, that's the first 7 out. We don't appear to have caused any damage. There are signs of there's a little bit of dirt, but we'll clean that up before putting the new frets in at the time when we clean the fret slots out. But yeah, that seems to be going pretty well. So I'll just carry on and do the rest of the frets, and we can come back at the next stage of the process. So here's our fretboard with all of the frets taken out. They all came out really nicely. There's no signs of damage at all on the fretboard. All I want to do now is to try and clean the area around the fret slots to get rid of any old built-up finger cheese, and that will provide us with a good surface for the new frets to go down into. So the next step is to just clear out the fret slots. So I like this little tool. This is made by Hosco, and it's just designed to clear out old fret slots, get rid of some of the junk that's sitting in there. You can use a standard fret saw, but I just find that this gives a little bit more control. And I can feel that there doesn't appear to be any glue in these slots. They feel sort of clean. If there's glue in, you can usually feel that it's claggy, chlory, slightly gummy. The advantage of using a fret saw comes if the fret slots are a little bit shallow for the new fret wire. Most fret wire comes with sort of a fairly standard size. The depth of the tangs can change, and if you're using fret wire that has a deeper tang, if the slot is not deep enough, the fret will never seat properly into the neck. So it is important to make sure that the fret slots, once cleared out, are deep enough to accept the new frets. If they're not, then you'll never end up with a good, well-seated fret. One other thing to do before we put new frets in is to just make sure that the lacquer around the fret slots is not sitting up too much to prevent a new fret going in over the top. So a little trick you can do is to take a razor blade and put some sellotape at either edge, leaving a little gap in the middle. And then those little barriers of sellotape are thick enough to allow you to just graze over the top of the fretboard, and it's just lifting the blade enough to avoid scratching the edges either side of the fret, but it will take off any high spots, which could be little lips of lacquer that are still sitting proud, and things that will just stop the fret from seating properly. So in this case, there isn't really much to do, but I can feel just slight raised areas in places. You can just about hear it as well. Okay, so there we are. So this is now ready to have some new frets installed. So the frets have been removed, the original frets, and the fretboard has been cleaned. And now we want to take the fret wire that we're going to use on this maple fretboard and bend it to the correct radius. So this is a 1980s Japanese maple neck, and it has a 7¼ inch radius. So what we're doing first is we're just taking the fret wire and removing any oil that may be left on the fret wire, oil that is left on in the manufacturing process. So we just clean the wire, and then we'll run it through the radiusing machine and see how it comes out. So I can't remember how I last set it, so let's just run it through and see how that looks in relation to the fretboard. So I don't know whether you can see that or not, but what we're looking for is a radius that is just slightly tighter than the radius of the fretboard. And it looks as if I set this up for a 7¼ inch radius the last time I used it, so this is just about spot on. So we're going to need probably 3 lengths of fret wire. There's 2. And there's 3. When we radius the fret wire, the first couple of centimeters are not radiused correctly, so we need to remove that. So just trim the ends of the fret wire. It's always a good idea to keep track of the pieces of fret wire that get removed, then you can throw those away so that the sharp edges don't find their way onto the next piece of work that you're doing. So those bits can go in the bin. So I have a little block here, which is labelled, and I'll cut each fret and put it in its relevant slot. So we take a piece of the radius wire, and what we're looking to do is to just cut a length that is slightly too big, maybe 2 or 3 millimeters either side. and we'll just do this for each fret. All right, that's the first 7. I'll do the rest and we'll come back when that's done. Right, so we have 21 frets. I use 3 pieces of wire. This is what's left. Put that aside. Probably get used another time. And let's just put each of these frets into their respective slots on this block, and once we've done that we can prepare the fretboard for pushing the frets into their slots. So for many years I used a fret hammer, which I liked, but more recently I've purchased an arbor press, which is very good for Fender style necks like this, where you can take the neck off and have full access to the neck, and with that you can press the frets in, and I feel that that gives more consistency than using a hammer. But both methods work fine, and in some cases you don't have any choice but to use a hammer because you can't have access, particularly to this end of the neck, when the guitar, in guitars where the neck is integral to the guitar, i.e. not a bolt-on neck. We're ready now to start putting the frets in, and what I've done is I've just set up this temporary platform. It's a bit Heath Robinson, but I haven't yet, this is quite new, so I haven't yet had the chance to make a more permanent structure for this. First things though is I want to glue the frets in. I generally glue them in when I do a refret, not necessarily when I make a new neck, but because you don't really know how thick the slots are or whether the frets are going to sit well, I tend to use this gel super glue, CA glue. It's very thick, and I just make these little tips and just put a small bead of super glue into the fret slot, and that just makes sure that the frets stay very solidly in the slots. So I'll just do the first one to check that everything is good, that the fret slots are the correct height, and once I'm happy that the frets are going to go in nicely, then I will do several at a time to speed the process up. So we're just putting a bead down the fret slot, taking care to make sure that it just goes in the slot and not around the outside. Then we take our first fret, just gently tap it in place. And then Just making sure that it's lined up nicely with this clamping caul, and then seat it into place. And hopefully you can see that that's nicely in. Once we're happy that the frets are going to go in nicely, we can speed up the process by doing a few at a time. So I'm not letting the bead of super glue go all the way to the edge, because I don't want it to be pushed out the sides and for it to run down the side of the neck. So this clamping device is called a fractal fret press, and the way that it's made means that the arm conforms to whatever radius you have. And the other nice thing is that if you just position it at the edge of the fret, then it makes sure that the edge of the fret is also nicely in. Sometimes if the fretboard is not a perfect radius, the edges of the frets can lift a little bit, and this just helps make sure that the frets go into their slots all the way across. And hopefully you can see that they look pretty good. So we now just need to continue the process until all the frets are in. So the fret is narrow, so it's two phases. Because we have a compensate radius, it works really well. So I'll these. The next thing to do is to just carefully remove the ends of the frets using a pair of fret nippers. I use these, they're from Stumac. They've got very sharp ground ends, which means you can get very close to the fretboard to remove the fret. And really you want this tool to do as much work as possible, trying not to twist the fret. Just want to take it off very carefully, and the fret ends tend to fly everywhere. Once I've finished this, I will tidy those up because they're very sharp. If this was stainless steel fret wire, then these tools get worn out very quickly with stainless steel, which is part of the reason that it's more expensive to refret a guitar with stainless steel fret wire. It's partly down to the damage that it does to the tools, but also it takes a little longer because the fret wire really is so tough that it just takes longer to file down. So that's one side done. I'll do the other side, and then we'll leave the neck just for a few hours for the super glue to harden. All right, well, I'll leave that for a little while, make sure that the super glue is hardened, And then the next phase will be to file the fret ends and add a bevel to the edges so that it's comfortable to play.